There have been some fantastic comedy sketches, and I think I found one of the originals. It's called The Four Yorkshiremen. It's pretty long, so I've cut it in half, but I'm sure you'll enjoy this one.
Who'd have thought, 40 years ago, that we'd be sitting here drinking Chateau de Chasselas?
I would have been glad of the price of a cup of tea then.
Ah, cup of cold tea.
Aye.
Without milk or sugar. Or tea.
And out of a cracked cup at that. Yeah.
We never had a cup. We used to drink out of a rolled-up newspaper. The best we could manage was to suck on a piece of damp cloth.
But, you know, I often think we were happier then, although we were poor.
Because we were poor.
Aye.
My old dad said to me, he said, money won't bring you happiness, son.
He was right.
Aye.
I was happier then. I had nothing. We used to live in a tiny, tumble-down old house with great holes in the roof.
House? You're lucky to have a house. We used to live in one room, 26 of us. All there. No furniture. Half the floor was missing, and we were all huddled in one corner for fear of falling.
Room? You were lucky to have a room. We used to have to live in corridor.
Corridor? Oh, I used to dream of living in a corridor. That would have been a palace to us. We used to live in a water tank on rubbish tip. Every morning we'd be woke up by having a load of rotting fish dumped on us. House.
Well, when I said house, I mean 'twere only hole in ground and covered by a couple of foot of torn canvas. But it were house to us.
We had it tough. I used to have to get out at shoebox at midnight, lick road clean, eat a couple of bits of cold gravel, work 23 hours a day at mill for a penny every 4 years, and when we got home, Dad used to slice us in half with a bread knife.
Right. We used to get up in morning at 10:30 at night, half an hour before we'd gone to bed, eat a lump of poison, work 29 hours a day at mill for 8 year lifetime, come home, and each night Dad would strangle us and dance about on our graves.
Aye, and you try and tell that to the young people of today. Will they believe you? No.
Now, of course, their stories have grown. I mean, every generation has their own stories, and your stories are growing as well. But you have to admit that somebody who grew up during the Great Depression and World War II, their stories were pretty big to start with. So it's not surprising that a generation born during the Great Depression would come to see a list like this as being their normal, their worldview of how to get ahead in life. Things like hard work, perseverance, sacrifice, sticking to the task. My mom and dad come from this generation, and this duty before pleasure value was a big one in our household. It normally played itself out at the dinner table, and went something like this. I was a naughty boy. I never ate my vegetables, and my mother would look at me and go, "Dean, if you don't eat your vegetables, you can't have any pudding." I just see a sign here. How many of you have heard that line? Yeah? A show of honesty. How many of you have used that line? Okay, well, I have a question for you which my mother never adequately answered. Why? Why must I eat all my vegetables? It was as if she was Superwoman, and she had this inbuilt MRI scanner. She could scan me up and down, like, and she would instantly know how many carbohydrates, vitamins, minerals, proteins I needed. And she could lovingly convert that scientific data into a bowl of rice, cabbage, Brussels sprouts, and kidney stew. Yeah. I used to try logic with my mom and say, "Mom, if I eat all my vegetables, I won't have any room for pudding." At which point she would always respond by saying, "There are starving children in Africa." Yeah. My sister used to try and be clever and say, "Mum, name one of them." And perhaps it wasn't that clever because it never worked. I tried a more subtle approach and said, "Mum, if the kids of Africa need my food, I will send them my food. I will even pay for the postage." But you know, it wasn't a case of world hunger or my own malnutrition. It was a waste not, want not value that was deeply ingrained within my mum, one that lives with her to this very day. Expiry dates on tins of food mean nothing to my mother. She can't throw food away. There are some very scary food experiments going on in her refrigerator. And at the holiday times when we would be heading off down to the coast, my dad would be in the car revving the engine. My mother would be dragging us back to the kitchen because we had to finish off the last half pint of milk, the few drops of orange juice, and I was always the kid who was given the ham, the eggs, and cheese to take next door to the neighbor because you don't waste food. Now, my father's no different. He has his shed outside with his tins and jars of rusting nuts and bolts that are fused together and broken TVs, kettles, and toasters. And you say to him, Dad, why do you keep all this junk? And he goes, you never know. Now, of course, these are my stories, but I can see a few of you nodding your heads and smiling, and I'm sure you have your own stories as well. But can you see how somebody who was born during this period, during the Great Depression and World War II, now in their 70s and their 80s, would come to see this list of words as their value system, as their normal, their roadmap of how to get ahead in life? It's not an exhaustive list, but can you see it? Would you agree? Okay, well, let's move on. Because the world didn't stay in a Great Depression and World War II. It moved on into a springtime. You moved past the crisis, and it was an age of Aquarius. It was the time of drugs, sex, and rock and roll. The baby boomers were born during the period after the Second World War. It was a time of grand ideologies and grand visions. You had the ideology of communism versus capitalism, fighting it out on the global stage. And perhaps one of the grandest visions of them all, putting a man on the moon. And they were a group of young children who looked up at the stars in the sky as Neil Armstrong walked on the moon. And they said, if we can do that, we can do anything. And this has largely shaped the baby boomer generation. This is an idealistic generation, an optimistic generation, a generation driven to succeed. This is a generation of workaholics. Man, this generation loves to work. They need to work. They love to work. As Ali G would say, baby boomers are in the house. They are the leaders of our countries, the leaders of our companies, and they pretty much control the show. And baby boomers are an incredibly important generation for marketers because they control 75 to 80% of the personal net wealth in the UK.